European History and World Wars I and II. In 1815, Europe promised peace, but one shot makes Europe bulldozed. War and Treaty in History. Peloponnese, 30 Years' War, Treaty of Westphalia. Peloponnesian War. Clash between Athens and Sparta. 30 Years' War. Conflicts between religion and politics. Treaty of Westphalia. The beginning of a sovereign state system. The Peloponnesian War was a war between the Delian League and the Peloponnesian League in 404 BC, and Thucydides argued that the growth of Athens' national power caused fear in Sparta, resulting in the war. The 30 Years' War was a war between Protestants and Catholics on the stage of Germany from 1618 to 1648, and was the largest and last religious war. When Ferdinand, a Catholic, ascended to the throne of Bohemia and forced the absolute Catholic faith, Bohemian and Austrian nobles protested, and the Treaty of Westphalia ended the religious war. The Treaty of Westphalia effectively destroyed the Holy Roman Empire as a Catholic empire and created a community of sovereign states. Changes in European political structures. Transitions in treaties and systems. Political changes after the Reformation. Key contents of the Treaty of Utrecht. Key contents of the Treaty of Rastatt. The main contents of the Treaty of Aachen. European cooperation system after the Napoleonic Wars. Equal status was granted to the Lutherans and Calvinists, and full territorial sovereignty and sovereignty were granted to the princes. A new system has been established to maintain order through the balance of power between countries. The Treaty of Utrecht ended the Spanish Succession War. Britain acquired land from France and Spain, and recognized Dutch commercial privileges. The Treaty of Rastatt ended the Spanish Succession War, and the German Emperor took possession of the Netherlands, Milan, Tuscany, and Sardinia. The Treaty of Aachen ended the Dutch War and the War of the Austrian Succession, and the relationship between Austria and Prussia deteriorated. Since then, the Napoleonic Wars and the European cooperation system have emerged. Changes in European situation. The flows of treaties and revolutions. Treaty of Kalisz. War and territorial partition. Treaty of Chaumont. Preventing the French re-invasion and balancing power. Second Paris Convention. Napoleon's fall and French occupation. 1830 Revolution. The beginning of conservative politics and imperialism. The Kalisz Treaty was signed between Prussia and Russia during the Great French War, agreed to divide Poland and Saxony, and decided to annex Russia's jurisdiction over Poland and Prussia to Saxony. The Treaty of Chaumont is a treaty of alliance with France by the four major powers to prevent the invasion of France, and it became the parent of the alliance of the four countries and stipulated the balance of power for the first time. The First Paris Convention was a conciliatory measure against France. The Second Paris Convention reaffirmed the Treaty of Chaumont and guaranteed France after Napoleon's final defeat in the wake of Napoleon's escape from Elba Island. The Revolution of 1830 was caused by the conservative politics of Charles X of France, restrictions on press and political freedom, and the dissolution of Parliament, and the July Revolution led to Louis Philippe's accession to the throne. Major events of independence and revolution in 19th century Europe. Belgian independence process. Attempts and frustrations for Polish independence. Hungarian independence movement. Revolution in the Italian peninsula and the war in Sardinia. Establishment of the Second French Republic. In 1830, Belgium declared independence and France supported it. In the same year, a provisional government was established in Poland due to a military rebellion, but Russian troops entered and were suppressed. Belgium's neutrality was guaranteed in the London Protocol of 1831, and the Netherlands formally recognized Belgium's independence in 1839. Hungary declared independence in 1848, but was suppressed by Austria, and Metternich fled to England. In the Italian peninsula, constitutions were granted to various regions, and Sardinia declared war on Austria, but was defeated and signed a ceasefire agreement. The French constitution was completed in 1848, and Louis Napoleon came to power, establishing the Second Republic. Major revolutions and events in 19th century Europe. July Revolution and Belgian independence. Polish Rebellion and Italian independence movement. February Revolution and Italian liberalism. Changes in Austria and Prussia. War and treaty. Tripoli, San Stefano. The July Revolution led to a rebellion in Belgium, defeating the Dutch army and proclaiming a constitutional monarchy. The Polish Rebellion of 1831 was suppressed by Russia, and the Italian independence movement was also suppressed by Austria. The February Revolution heightened the liberal movement in Italy and adopted a liberal constitution, but Sardinia was overpowered by Austria. Austria's Metternich was overthrown, and Prussia's liberalism was strengthened. The Tripoli War was caused by Italy, and the Treaty of San Stefano was signed after the Russian victory in the Rudder War and stipulated the provisions of Great Bulgaria. Modern international system and European cooperation system. Purpose and principles of the European cooperation system. Characteristics of the modern international system. Problems and collapse of the European cooperation system. Collapse of the Bismarck alliance system. The European cooperation system was maintained on the principle of balance of power and conservatism, which meant restoring the situation in Europe before the Napoleonic War and was led by Britain. The modern international system has the characteristics of the coexistence system of sovereign states, the dispatch and reception of diplomatic envoys, the spatial limitations of the spread of sovereignty divided by borders, and the order of international law. The European cooperation system collapsed into the Crimean War and the Bismarck War due to the confrontation between liberalism and conservatism, the confrontation between France and Russia on Eastern issues, and the confrontation between Austria and Russia in the Balkans. The Bismarck alliance system began to collapse after the resignation of Bismarck due to the promotion of German imperialist policies. Major events and principles in European history. War and treaties. Conflicts and resolution in Europe. Germany and Bismarck. Unification and alliance. Principles of the European cooperation system. Characteristics of the European cooperation system. Orthodoxism and conservatism. The European cooperation system refers to a collective security system after the Napoleonic War, and it was developed in the direction of protecting the empty system on European issues through mutual cooperation and joint response between great powers. This meant to coordinate the mutual interests of the great powers with the aim of preventing the recurrence of France and border changes, and was characterized by the suppression of elitism and nationalism centered on the great powers, using balance of power and orthodoxy as the governing principles. In addition, orthodox and conservative principles are related to nationalism and nationalism, which are the basis for the formation of a nation-state. Vienna Conference. Beginning of European order reorganization. Background and initial decision of the meeting. Key decisions and outcomes. The Vienna Conference was held to deal with the French defeat, and the French border was decided in 1792 and Louis XVIII was appointed as King of France. There was a conflict of interest in the Polish and Saxon issues, and most of Poland was occupied by Russia and the German Federation was formed. Austria acquired Venice and Lombardy, and Britain acquired Malta and the Ionian Archipelago. The Kingdom of the Netherlands and Denmark were formed, Norway was annexed by Sweden, and Finland was annexed by Russia. Switzerland has gained the status of a small neutral country, and Austria has been compensated in Italy and Illyria. The Rhine River Commission was born. Inflection point in European history. Major 19th century events. European realignment after the fall of Napoleon. Causes of the Crimean War. Consequences and effects of the Crimean War. With the Second Treaty of Paris, the French border retreated to that time in 1790, and a decision was made to pay compensation, and Napoleon returned to St. Helena. The four-nation alliance between Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria established a united front against France and regularized conference diplomacy. The Vienna Conference allowed Switzerland to be neutral for the first time. The Crimean War began in a confrontation between France and Russia over the right to protect the Jerusalem region, and when the right to protect the Holy Land was jointly distributed by the Sultan's decree, Russia illegally occupied Moldavia and Wallachia. Accordingly, the Anglo-French fleet demanded the withdrawal after entering Beshik Bay, but Russia refused, and Anglo-French declared war. Sardinia's participation in the war created an atmosphere favorable to the unification of Italy, and Prussia's neutrality created an atmosphere favorable to the unification of Germany. The Crimean War was a direct factor in the collapse of the European cooperation system. Background and consequences of Crimean War. The interests and alliances of the powers. Britain-Russia confrontation. French interests and policies. Austria's position and results. Characteristics of the Holy Alliance. The Crimean War originated from the confrontation between Britain and Russia over the partition of Ottoman Turkey, frustrating Russia's southward movement and strengthening Britain's hegemonic status. France pursued interests through the issue of Holy Land jurisdiction and the protection of Catholicism by Napoleon III. Austria wanted to maintain the status quo as a multi-ethnic state, but it was isolated due to discord with Russia, creating a favorable atmosphere for German reunification. France restored diplomatic power, strengthened Napoleon III's legitimacy, and acquired jurisdiction over the Holy Land. Meanwhile, the Holy Alliance is an alliance between Russia, Prussia, and Austria, which suppressed liberalism based on conservative ideas and made Christian ideals the ideological basis of international relations. Aix-la-Chapelle Conference and Troppau-Liebaja Conference. Reorganizing the European order. The main contents of the Aix-la-Chapelle Conference. Troppau and Liebaja conferences and suppression of liberalism. The Aix-la-Chapelle meeting dealt with the issue of the expiry of the French presence and the withdrawal of the garrison, and the process before and after the Napoleonic War was completed, ultimately meaning the end of the war and the restoration of France's status as a European power. France joined through the maintenance of the four-nation alliance, and a dual structure of Lodz political coexistence emerged. The Troppau and Liebaja meetings focused on the oppression of nationalism and liberalism that began to emerge in weaker countries, and Austria was entrusted to restore order in Naples, revoking the constitution and restoring the authority of the King of Naples. The influence of the Napoleonic Wars led to the demand for a liberal constitution, and the Troppau Conference had the principle of interference, and the Liebaja Conference had a concrete action plan, so Austria intervened to maintain the tyrannical monarchy and support Sardinia to suppress the Turin Rebellion. Verona Conference and Paris Conference. Changes in European diplomacy. Background and results of the Verona Conference. Differences in the positions of great powers. Significance of the Vienna Conference. The main contents of the Paris Conference. The Verona Conference focused on the discussion of the Spanish Civil War and was gathered with the aim of restoring the authority of the Spanish king. And the British non-interventionism on the Spanish issue and the Russian interference ISM were at odds. The Holy Three States delegated the suppression of the rebellion to France, and France decided to interfere to restore its honor. Russia insisted on France's return to a great power, but Britain opposed France's return to a great power and valued the four-nation alliance. Britain adhered to non-interventionism for the purpose of protecting Spanish colonies in South America. The Paris Conference settled the Crimean War and denied Russia's superior status over Turkey, while Britain's global status was strengthened. Crisis and change in the European cooperation system. Changes in the status of the Danube Duchy. The rise of liberalism and nationalism. Treaty of Chaumont and the International Order. Key results of the Paris Peace Conference. The Danube Duchy was formally under Turkish control, but was actually under Austrian influence. The desire to form a nation-state due to the spread of liberalism, the Eastern issue, and the Americas issue caused a crisis in the European cooperation system. Greece was supported by Britain over the issue of the independence of weaker countries, and Belgium became independent as a result of the July Revolution, bringing significant changes to the Vienna system. The Treaty of Chaumont codified the balance of power for the first time, and the European cooperation system made balance of power and orthodoxy the principles of the international order. At the Paris Peace Conference, it was decided to neutralize the Black Sea, maintain autonomy in the Danube Principality, preserve Turkey's territory and guarantee independence, deny Russia's Greek Orthodox authority in Turkey, navigate the Danube's freedom, and demilitarize the Iran. Political fluctuations in Europe and the Americas. Major 19th century events. Crimean War and European situation changes. Monroeism and the international status of the United States. Background of the collapse of the Vienna regime. Italian unification. The Crimean War and the Paris Peace Conference made Russia a status quo country, undermined Austria's international prestige, created an atmosphere of unification between Italy and Germany, and served as an opportunity for Turkey to emerge as a member of the European cooperation system. Monroeism harmonized the interests of Britain and the United States, contributed to the unilateral declaration of U.S. policy and the formation of the origins of a pluralistic pan-American state, marked the beginning of the Vienna regime agitation led by Metternich, caused the de facto domination of the United States over South America, brought about a break from European domination in the Americas, and acted as a justification ideology for the U.S. national interest without a fixed entity. The Vienna system collapsed due to Monroeism and independence of South America, Greek independence and Egyptian affairs, Belgian independence, the French February Revolution, the overthrow of Metternich, and the Rudder War. Italian unification process. Major events and the role of France. Background and key variables of unification. Treaties relating to French assistance. The conclusion of unification and the adoption of the Constitution. The Orsinia Incident of 1858 made France interested in Italian nationalism. The Plombier Secret Treaty contains territorial compensation for France, and France acquired Nice and Savoy. Sardinia joined the Crimean War as a British army and became a decisive variable in Italian unification. Unification was promoted through the war with Austria, and the Plombier Convention received French aid and military support, and there was a clause prohibiting sole reinforcement. France was promised neutrality as a condition of abolishing the Black Sea Neutrality Clause through a secret agreement with Russia. French support was absolute, and Austria seriously retreated. Napoleon III signed the Treaty of Armistice of Bollafranca, handing over only Lombardy, excluding Venice, to Sardinia and deciding to maintain the status quo. In 1958, the Sardinian constitution was adopted as the constitution of the Kingdom of Italy, unification was completed, and a French-style centralized system was adopted. Conflicts in the Garstein Agreement and German unification process. Schleswig-Holstein issue and Bismarck's position. Content and problems of the Garstein Agreement. Deepening confrontation between Prussia and Austria. Prussia and Austria jointly intervened when, due to Danish issues, Prussia demanded the annexation of Schleswig, the German federal parliament demanded that it be cancelled, and demanded that Saxony declare war on Denmark. Bismarck declared that Holstein, Lauenburg, and Schleswig were jointly controlled with Austria, intending to have a dispute over regional division. With the Garstein Agreement, Holstein became Austrian domination and Lauenburg became Prussian domination, but Austria was in a situation where it had to pass Prussia and dominate Holstein, which became the seed of the dispute between Austria and Prussia. Prussia and Austria decided to appoint Wilhelm as king of the German Federal Empire, but only the German-speaking Austrian region was recognized as the German Empire, and the rest were excluded, effectively excluding Austria from the German Empire. Amutze's humiliation led to the Prussian-centered Inter-Small States Monarchical Conference and the Austrian-centered Frankfurt Conference. German unification process. Major events and background. The situation before the advent of Bismarck. Major diplomatic moves. Handling before and after the Boer War. The Bobbio War and its consequences. Prussia succumbed to Schwarberg's ultimatum, confirming Austria's superiority. After that, the customs union was completed, a trade treaty between France and Prussia was signed, and after the regency of Wilhelm I, Bismarck appeared. The Danish problem arose and the Boy Alliance was signed after Napoleon III's neutrality was guaranteed. After the Boer War, the Treaty of Prea and the preliminary Treaty of Nickelsburg allowed Austria to approve the dissolution of the German Confederation and the unification of northern Germany. Behind the Bobbio War was the Benedetti document and Bismarck's will to unify southern Germany. Major events before and after the Bobbio War in the process of German unification. Luxembourg incident and diplomatic tensions rising. Ems telegram incident and war outbreak. German unification process. Prussia opposed the announcement of the sale of Luxembourg, so Napoleon III's plan failed, and Luxembourg was neutralized through the London Conference. With the Borough Agreement, Russia kept Austria in check and relations between France and Prussia deteriorated. The Ems telegram incident triggered Bismarck's decision to fight against the Bobbio War, and he induced the British to expose their ambitions in France through the Benedetti Treaty. Napoleon III was captured at the Battle of Sedan, and the unification of Germany was achieved with the victory of the disinfection monism that excluded Austria, mainly Prussia. German and Italian unification process and its impact. Early unification process and diplomatic relations. Treaty and post-unification policy. Consequences of unification and changes in neighboring countries. Britain was in a favorable position to German unification for the balance of power in Europe. The Alven's-Reben Agreement is an agreement between Prussia and Russia on Poland. Prussia and Austria signed a peace treaty through the Treaty of Prague and Disinfection Monism I. France and Prussia signed the Treaty of Peace of Frankfurt, which ceded Alsace-Lorraine to Germany, and France paid compensation. The Nickelsburg Peace Reserve was agreed upon, demanding a ceasefire in the process of German reunification. Bismarck advocated a policy of peace and a policy of maintaining the status quo after German reunification. During the German unification process, Italy restored Rome and Russia abolished the Black Sea Neutrality Clause. France established a republic, and both Germany and Italy became independent from Austria. In the 19th century, conservatives won in Europe with the political logic of power under the leadership of Sardinia, Prussia, and Cavour Bismarck. Central Europe has been strengthened, border buffer zones have disappeared, and the Balkans have become a battleground. Rome became under Italian jurisdiction. Bismarck's analysis of German unification policy and alliance system. Policy formulation for German reunification. Characteristics of the Bismarck alliance system. Limitations and fall of the Bismarck system. Bismarck established an economic foundation through customs unions during German reunification and increased his armaments with iron blood policies. His alliance system sought to build a system of oppression through a net-like alliance based on non-ideology and avoid the risk of ambivalence. Bismarck sought to maintain the status quo in Europe, recognized the system of domination by the monarch, negotiated through secret diplomacy, and attempted to maintain hegemony through alliances. He claimed to be an advocate of a conservative European order, ran counter to the nationalist movement, had a collective security character, and showed disdain for the Eurocentric and non-European region. As the overseas market became an essential element of the European order, the Bismarck system collapsed, and after achieving internal security in Europe, it focused on overseas colonial strategy, and Germany supported France and aimed at French isolation and Russian neutrality. Background of the collapse of the Bismarck regime and World War I. Causes of the collapse of the Bismarck system. Conflict between Germany and France intensifies. Russia's advance into the Balkans. The outbreak and development of the Balkan War. After Bismarck's retirement, Wilhelm II took office, and Germany broke the German-Russian Reassurance Treaty, leading to Russia's departure from the alliance system and the establishment of the Triple Alliance. The Mediterranean Agreement began to collapse at the end, and imperialism in the Bismarck alliance system revealed inherent limitations. Germany was concerned about France's strengthening of arms and banned smuggling to France, and the unrivaled relationship deteriorated and was mediated by Russia. Germany recognized the weakness of the three-party negotiations and realized the need for technical and detailed alliances, leading to the collapse of the first three-party negotiations. Russia tried to achieve the traditional southward policy and use pan-Slavism politically. Balkan countries revolted against Turkey, Bulgaria under Turkish influence also revolted, and Turkey carried out massacres. Serbia and Montenegro declared war on Turkey but were defeated, and Russia intervened and the Ruther War broke out. Background of the Berlin Conference. Russo-Turkish War and the intervention of the powers. Key contents of the Treaty of San Stefano. Agreement between the situation before the outbreak of war and the great powers. The development of the war and the consequences of the Treaty of San Stefano. Russia unilaterally signed the Treaty of San Stefano, stipulating the provisions of Greater Bulgaria, recognizing the independence of Serbia, Montenegro and Romania, and recognizing Austrian autonomy in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Behind the Berlin Conference were insurgencies in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Turkish repression and Austrian mediation. The Reichstag Agreement stated that Austria and Russia would influence the status quo when Turkey wins and influence the Balkan changes when Serbia wins. The Budapest Agreement is a Russia-Austria agreement that included Austria's demand for neutrality and territorial compensation in the event of the outbreak of the Russo-Turkish War. When Turkey's rejection of the London Joint Protocol increased the possibility of war, Russia declared war, and the Treaty of San Stefano agreed to Austria to oversee Bosnia and Herzegovina and Russia to occupy the provisions of Greater Bulgaria. The diplomatic transformation of the great powers surrounding the Black Sea and the Balkans. Treaties and regulations relating to the Black Sea. Main contents of the Berlin Conference: the collapse of the three-party negotiations and the strengthening of France's arms. The Treaty of Lutskaner and the Treaty of Unjarskelasi stipulated the loss of Turkey's status as a Black Sea inner sea country, Russia's acquisition of Crimea, and free passage through the Black Sea. The 1841 Treaty of London confirmed Turkey's sovereignty over the strait, and the 1856 Treaty of Paris stipulated the demilitarization of the Black Sea, but the 1871 Treaty of London abolished the demilitarization of the Black Sea and recognized Turkey with the right to open the strait. At the Berlin Conference, Bismarck claimed to be a mediator and sought to maintain the status quo of the great powers in the Balkans, while Bosnia and Herzegovina was placed under Austrian occupation. Russia's provisions against Bulgaria were thwarted by the Bulgarian Three Divisions, which triggered the collapse of the three-party negotiations, and Britain secured a firm position in the eastern Mediterranean. The Bulgarian crisis and the Blanger incident caused the collapse of the three-party negotiations, and the Blanger incident led to France's strengthening of its arms in preparation for revenge against Germany. European situation in the late 19th century. The Russo-French alliance, the Triple Alliance, and the Bulgarian crisis. Tensions between Russia and Germany and the contradiction of alliances. Germany's diplomatic strategy and the formation of the Triple Alliance. French militaristic movement, Bulgaria crisis and conflict between the powers. Public opinion on the Russo-French alliance has risen. Germany signed the German-Russian Reassurance Treaty, which recognizes Russia's dominance in the Balkans, but the contradiction with the German-Russian alliance was recognized. After the collapse of the Three Emperors Alliance, Bismarck first signed the Doko Alliance to induce Russia. Italy approached Doko and signed a trilateral alliance with France's protection of Tunisia and Germany's offer of an economic alliance. Blanche insisted on a revenge war against Germany after being appointed as defense minister. When a Vienna War broke out in East Rumelia and Bulgaria declared annexation and implemented anti-Russian policies, Serbia declared war, but was defeated and Austria mediated. Bulgaria and Serbia had pro-Hungarian tendencies, and Austria-Russia relations deteriorated, leading to the collapse of the Second Tripartite Negotiation. Tensions between European powers escalated in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Formation of alliances and confrontations. Conflict between Britain and Germany. Negotiations and arms race between Britain and Russia. Russia's policy changes and Britain's position. Concerns about German expansion. Russia raised the theory of alliance with France, and Germany passed the Arms Bill, which served as an opportunity to conclude the trilateral negotiations. The Triple Entente was against the Triple Alliance, and Wilhelm II, despite Bismarck's advice, scrapped the German-Russian Reassurance Treaty. Britain and Germany were at odds with the 3C and 3B policies within the African colonies, and Britain sought negotiations with Russia by actively forming a siege of Germany. In the Anglo-Russian negotiations, Britain and Germany competed in the naval competition and suffered a vicious cycle of arms buildup. Russia sought to re-enter the Balkans after the retreat from the Far East and coordinated its interests in Afghanistan and Tibet between Britain and Russia. The UK needed to reduce defense costs in India and stop Japan in the Far East, and Russia expressed concern about Germany's construction of the Baghdad Railway and its entry into Persia. Anglo-French and Russo-French negotiations. A reorganization of European diplomacy in the early 20th century. Background and results of Anglo-French negotiations. Attempts to improve relations between France and Russia. Contents and military meaning of the Russo-French negotiations. The Anglo-French negotiations determined that France could not deal with Britain and Germany at the same time, so they surrendered to Britain in African colonies. Established the scope of influence between the two countries in North Africa and the Nile, and defined Morocco as belonging to France. Britain failed naval negotiations with Germany and formed an alliance with France to escape isolation. Improving Anglo-French relations has contributed to the coordination of understanding of colonial issues. The Russo-French negotiations meant escape from isolation for both Russia and France, and the Russo-French military agreement in August 1892 took on a military character. Russia negotiated on condition that it would not participate in France's revenge war against Germany. Diplomatic changes and alliances between European powers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Diplomatic changes and conflicts in Britain, France and Germany. Italy's diplomatic moves and relations between the powers. Italy's position before and after the outbreak of World War I. Germany reorganized its military law to increase arms and prepare for two-sided warfare in preparation for the Russo-French negotiations. The Boer War served as an opportunity for Britain to shift from isolation to alliance policy, and the British military felt inefficiency and international isolation through the Boer War. The Pashoda incident was a confrontation between France and Britain in Pashoda, Sudan, and was resolved by French concessions, which led to the conclusion of the Anglo-French negotiations. Italy extended the trilateral alliance in 1896, but in 1901, France and Italy exchanged memoranda mutually acknowledging their interests in Morocco and Libya, suggesting the possibility of an alliance between the two countries. In 1902, Russia and Italy signed an agreement on the obligation to neutralize between the two countries. In August 1914, Italy declared neutrality, claiming that Austria violated the Triple Alliance for not announcing the annexation of Serbia, and Romania also declared neutrality. In April 1915, Italy signed the Treaty of London in exchange for territorial compensation. German diplomatic failure and Moroccan incident. Conflict in imperialist era. Formation of allies and distribution of territories. Overview of the Moroccan case and the interests of the great powers. The consequences of German diplomatic failures and imperialist expansion. The nature of Moroccan problems. He declared his accession to the negotiations, declared war on Germany, and demanded Adalia in the Adriatic Sea and southern Turkey as territorial compensation. Bulgaria declared its joining with Austria-Germany and promised Macedonia. In the Moroccan case, Britain, Germany, and France were interested in the railway, port, and commercial factors of Morocco. Britain was interested in the geopolitical position of Morocco, and France was interested in acquiring control over the Moroccan police and actual Moroccan control. The Algeciras Agreement attempted to mediate the Moroccan issue, but it led to the failure of German diplomacy, causing Germany's isolation, resulting in a military buildup and security dilemma. The solidarity of the Triple Entente negotiations was strengthened, and Germany's expansionist nature accelerated the arms buildup. During the Moroccan incident, Italy succeeded in annexing Tripoli, and Wilhelm II's misjudgment and Morocco's strategic location as important waterways were also problematic. Morocco crisis and annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Conflict between European powers. Madrid Agreement and Morocco's status. German intervention and French expansion of influence. Conflict between Britain and Germany intensifies. Confirmation of Moroccan protectorate and German retreat. Annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and its impact. The Madrid Agreement confirmed Morocco's independence and territorial preservation, but stipulated the privileges of foreigners. Germany regarded Morocco as a reward area and tried to separate Anglo-French relations. France has effectively occupied Morocco with special interests such as police forces and banks approved. When Germany sent troops after the Moroccan Civil War, Britain reacted strongly. Due to the Agadir crisis, France occupied Fez and Germany took part of French Congo instead of recognizing the French establishment of the Moroccan protectorate. Germany's demand for compensation was cancelled due to French refusal and British intervention, and the Moroccan agreement officially recognized France's protection rule. Austria's annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina was approved at the Berlin Conference and the tripartite negotiations, which meant strengthening the unity of Germany and Austria and strengthening its aggressive character. The eve of the outbreak of World War I. European tensions and conflicts. Conflicts between European powers intensify. Italy's annexation of Tripoli and the reaction of the great powers. Unstable situation in the Balkans. Hostilities between Germany and Russia were formed, and Italy left as the trilateral alliance system weakened. Tensions between the Triple Alliance and the Triple negotiations have risen, and Pan-Slav nationalism has risen, and Serbia has strongly protested. Italy annexed Tripoli through the Tripoli War and was approved by the great powers. During the Balkan War, Turkey was ousted from Europe due to the First Balkan War, and Bulgaria declared war on Serbia and Greece due to the Second Balkan War. Turkey fought in the Balkan War to restore Adrianople and Romania to compensate for its territory. Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece formed a four-nation alliance, and hostility between Austria and Serbia peaked. Germany acquired the right to lay the Constantinople-Persian Gulf Railway, but the Rutter Agreement placed the sub-Baghdad under British influence. The Balkan War ended with the Treaty of Bucharest, but the conflict between Serbia and Austria intensified over the Albanian issue, which triggered the Sarajevo incident. Major events and agreements related to World War I. Conference on National Self-Determination and Reinforcement. Germany's change of position and the Constantinople Agreement. Morocco and Balkan Crisis. The events in Sarajevo and the spark of war. Declaration of Alliance and Neutrality. Wilson's principle of national self-determination in 1917 became the basis of the Paris Peace Conference. In 1914, Germany gave up its command of the fortress of Constantinople. During the Moroccan incident, Italy succeeded in annexing Tripoli in the Tripoli War, and the Moroccan and Balkan incidents were the background of World War I. During World War I, the Allies agreed to the partition of Ottoman Turkey. The Sarajevo incident sparked World War I when the Austrian crown prince and his wife were killed by a member of the Serbian nationalist secret society. In September 1914, Britain, France, and Russia decided not to strengthen alone, and Japan issued an ultimatum and declaration of war to Germany. In August 1914, Germany and Turkey formed a secret alliance that Germany and Turkey would also participate in the war if Russia intervened by force. In August 1914, Italy declared neutrality. In 1917, the first socialist state was established in Russia under the leadership of Lenin, and in 1907, the Hague World Peace Conference made peaceful resolution of the conflict a principle. Major events and treaties during World War I. The pre-war situation, Treaty on Russia, Arab-related treaties and commitments. Palestinian independence commitment, Italian participation in the war and territorial compensation. Bulgaria, Romania and Greece's participation in the war. German-Austrian commitment to Poland's independence. Treaty on France. Romania declared neutrality. The Constantinople Agreement recognized Russia's ownership of the strait. With the Hussein Agreement, Britain supported the Arab movement and promised to create the Greater Arab League, and the Sykes-Picot Agreement was to create an Arab state under joint Anglo-French influence. With the declaration of the Fon language, Britain promised Palestine to build an independent state. With the Treaty of London, Italy joined the negotiations in exchange for territorial compensation and declared war on Germany. Bulgaria joined Germany with the promise of Macedonia and joined the negotiations on the premise of compensation for Romania and Christ's territory. Germany and Austria pledged support for Poland's independence after the war. The Buller Agreement indicates France's superiority over the Rhine. Foreign policy of major countries before and after World War I. French diplomatic failure. Background of France's participation in the war. Isolationism and foreign policy changes in the United States. German rise in the Treaty of Locarno. Germany's position on Austria. The Anglo-Japanese alliance was thwarted by the defeat of the Russo-Japanese War, and France participated in World War I to restore Alsace-Lorraine. The United States maintained an isolationist policy with the Monroe Doctrine and did not intervene in Europe, and after the declaration of the opening of the door, it actively promoted its policy toward Asia. Germany's acquisition of the right to lay the Baghdad Railway was at odds with Russia's policy toward the south. The Treaty of Locarno marks the complete end of World War I, and Germany has signed a peaceful settlement agreement with France and Belgium. The treaty includes an agreement to guarantee the western border of Germany, and Germany was granted permanent membership in the LN in 1926. World War I and Paris Peace Conference. Major events and consequences. Pre-war situation and strategy. Causes of the outbreak of war and the reasons for the British participation in the war. The development of World War I. Major decisions of the Paris Peace Conference. Germany prepared for a two-sided war with a slip-and plan to attack France before the Russian attack. France established a Maginot Line strategy to defend against German reinvasion. World War I began with the confrontation between Austria and Russia in the Balkans, and Britain participated in the war to ensure Belgium's neutrality and balance of power in Europe. Germany fought a two-sided battle on the eastern and western fronts for the first 3 years, but after the German-Russian armistice, it focused on the western front, but was defeated by the concentration of the Allied forces. At the Paris Peace Conference, Germany's return to Alsace-Lorraine, the Free City of Danzig, the decision to recognize war responsibility and pay compensation, and the German blockade through strengthening neighboring countries were decided. Formation and structure of the Versailles System. The beginning and background of the Versailles System. Peace treaty and its main contents. Wilson's 14 Articles and the International Federation. Post-war treatment and structure of the Versailles System. The Versailles System was formed through the Versailles Conference, which was initiated by the three countries of the United States, Britain, and France in 1919. Based on Wilson's 14 articles, this system included principles such as abolishing secret diplomacy, promoting freedom of the sea, promoting free trade, forming a collective security system, and national self-determination. The Versailles regime aimed at post-war treatment of World War I and the formation of a new international order, and dealt with the issue of dealing with defeated countries and Germany's arms restrictions as key issues. In addition, it sought to prevent the reduction and revival of the defeated Germany's territory and introduced collective security. Post-war political upheavals and collective security regimes in Europe. Overview of the treaty, German reparations and their resolution. Deteriorating Anglo-French relations and the Cannes Conference. Occupation of the Ruhr and efforts to restore the German economy. Guarantees and their limitations for Germany. The emergence of the European collective security system and the Treaty of Locarno. The treaties of Versailles, Saint-Germain, Trianon, and Neuilly were signed en masse. The Compensation Committee decided that the total amount of German compensation would be 150 billion marks, and when Germany refused, it threatened to occupy Düsseldorf and the Ruhr provinces, winning Germany's acceptance. At the 1922 Cannes Conference, France demanded Russia's repayment of its debt, and Russia demanded compensation for damages caused by the interference of the wartime allies, and Anglo-French relations deteriorated. After France's occupation of the Ruhr, the Stresemann Agreement and the Dose Proposal were reached, and a committee was established to restore the German currency. There were arms restrictions and Rhineland non-armament as guarantees for Germany, but political guarantees failed due to the U.S. Congress's refusal to ratify U.S. intervention. The Treaty of Locarno was signed under the leadership of Germany with the aim of maintaining the status quo on the left bank of the Rhine in the wake of France's occupation of the Ruhr. International security systems in crises in the early 20th century. Establishment of a European security system. Treaty of the Ministry of War and its limitations. Washington Conference on Disarmament. Great Depression and the System Crisis. Italy's guarantees were intended to eliminate security unrest in France. To this end, mutual guarantees, arbitration, and aid treaties were signed, and Germany's eastern border and right bank of the Rhine were guaranteed. Matters concerning the right bank of the Rhine were signed with the Czech Republic and Poland, respectively, led by France, and Germany joined the League of Nations. France proposed a U.S. non-war treaty to bring the U.S. and Soviet Union into a security system, but it was ineffective due to the lack of sanctions. The Washington Disarmament Conference was a conference to form a national order in the Asia-Pacific region of the United States. The Great Depression of 1929 was the background of the emergence of forces that broke the phenomenon, such as Germany and Japan. World War I and the international situation of the 1930s. Consequences of the Treaty of Versailles. Background of the United States' participation in the war. Diplomatic situation during World War I. International situation in the 1930s. Wilson's 14 clauses. After World War I, Germany lost its territory and population and adopted a republic, and Poland was established in the east. The Ottoman Empire and the German colonies were mandated by the League of Nations. The U.S. participation in World War I was based on the economic impact of Germany's unlimited submarine operations, the Zimmermann telegram incident, and the U.S. trade contraction. During the war, Britain used Arabs to fight Turkey, promising to build a Jewish state in Palestine, and the Ottoman Empire fell. In the 1930s, events such as Italy's invasion of Ethiopia, the Spanish Civil War, and the Munich Agreement occurred, and the League of Nations failed to stop the invasion of Italy, Germany, and Japan. Wilson proposed 14 articles for international peace. Situation in Germany before and after World War I. Dosen Plan and payment of compensation. Comparison of policies in the time of Bismarck and Wilhelm II. Dosen includes an agreement on the forced occupation of the Ruhr region by France and the postponement of payment of German reparations, and the introduction of German loans promoted industrialization and facilitated payment of reparations. The mortuary was decided to require Germany to pay 2 billion marks a year, while France would take 500 million marks and pay over 59 years. During World War I, Germany pursued Wilhelm II's global policy and imperialist expansion policy through the era of hegemony and industrial capitalism during the Bismarck era. Bismarck pursued a policy of maintaining the status quo, but Wilhelm II pursued a global policy and used a combination of controlled imperialism and economic imperialism. Treaty of Locarno and German rearmament. Background, content, and collapse. Key contents of the Treaty of Locarno. German rearmament process and collapse of the Locarno system. Background and main purpose of the signing of the Treaty of Locarno. The Treaty of Locarno was led by France to incorporate Germany into the Locarno system and to prevent access to the Soviet Union from international isolation. Although it was intended to demilitarize the Rhineland, it allowed war for self-defense, and it had the characteristics of signing arbitration treaties and ensuring collective safety between countries. Germany joined the League of Nations under the guarantee of Britain and Italy, but the Locarno system collapsed in 1935 due to Germany's decision to rearm. After Hitler came to power, Germany abolished the Treaty of Locarno, annexed Austria, and declared a rearmament, and the signing of the French-Soviet Treaty and the strengthening of Britain's arms influenced Germany's decision to rearm. German radical nationalist imperialism and foreign strategy. Imperial aggression and reparations issues. Germany's rearmament and the response of neighboring countries. Hitler's emergence and aggressive foreign policy. The text provided reflects the aggressive nature of radical nationalist imperialism. Germany's slip-in plan was an all-out and two-sided plan. The Paris Peace Conference discussed the issue of compensation to Germany, with France aiming to prevent the German revival, and Britain opposing it to maintain a balance of power. After the German annexation of the Saar region and the re-implementation of the conscription system in 1935, Britain increased military spending, France extended its military service period, and Anglo-French established the Strezza United Front to reaffirm the Treaty of Locarno and confirm Austrian independence. Hitler adopted a policy to break down the status quo based on Nazism and insisted on the need to secure strong military power for the purpose of securing a space to survive based on Darwinism of survival of the fittest, leaving the League of Nations and attempting to abolish the arms provisions under the Treaty of Versailles. The Anglo-French League responded to Germany's decision to rearmament with the Strezza Agreement, and the Anglo-German Naval Disarmament Agreement set a 135 ratio. Changes in the international situation and the collapse of the Versailles system in the early 20th century, invasion of Manchuria and the helplessness of the League of Nations. The rise of fascism and rising tensions in Europe. Economic difficulties and the crisis in Austria. German aggressive foreign policy, the process of the collapse of the Versailles system. Japan's invasion of Manchuria was an event that revealed the weakness of the Versailles system, and the Litten Committee declared that Manchukuo was a puppet government. Italy's invasion of Ethiopia triggered Hitler to change the Versailles system. The Spanish Civil War influenced the formation of the Roman-Berlin main axis. At the 1929 Hague Conference, the withdrawal of Rhineland was decided, and Austria's obligation to pay compensation was exempted. In 1931, Austria declared the abandonment of the Doko Economic Union, requesting aid from the League after its financial bankruptcy. In the 1930s, Germany pursued foreign policy in the order of the Customs Union Treaty, the withdrawal of the League of Nations, the decision to revert to Germany in the Saar region, and the signing of the Munich Agreement. Germany pursued expansion of the German ethnic residents in the name of securing a space for survival, and annexed Austria and the Czech Republic to collapse the Versailles system. The UK and France have identified errors in appeasement policy. European and Middle East situation in the early 20th century. The flow of war and diplomacy. The situation in Europe before the outbreak of World War II. German influence and the fall of the Ottoman Empire. German naval buildup and world policy. U.S.-Japan relations and reorganization of world order. Brest Treaty of Litovsk and its impact. The Munich Agreement was the last appeasement policy of European countries to Germany. Germany invaded Poland after the signing of the Totzin Non-Aggression Treaty, and World War II broke out. Ottoman Turkey was defeated as a result of its alliance with Germany, and the Baghdad Railway served as a channel for Turkish support for Germany and German imperialism. Germany's fleet policy was the core of world policy, emphasizing the need for seismic control and focusing on building battleships, and virtually designating the British fleet. The Gazroteft Treaty has the meaning of reorganizing the world order based on the diplomacy of great powers between the US and Japan. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was a peace treaty between the Soviet Union and Germany, which served as an opportunity for the Soviet Union to continue its revolution, disarm the Soviet Army, the Soviet Union's intention to leave the Allies during World War I, and Germany to focus on the West. European and Middle East situation in the early 20th century. The flow of war and diplomacy. The situation in Europe before the outbreak of World War II. German influence and the fall of the Ottoman Empire. German naval buildup and world policy. US-Japan relations and reorganization of world order. Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and its impact. The Munich Agreement was the last appeasement policy of European countries to Germany. Germany invaded Poland after the signing of the Toxin Non-Aggression Treaty, and World War II broke out. Ottoman Turkey was defeated as a result of its alliance with Germany, and the Baghdad Railway served as a channel for Turkish support for Germany and German imperialism. Germany's fleet policy was the core of world policy, emphasizing the need for seismic control and focusing on building battleships, and virtually designating the British fleet. The Gazroteft Treaty has the meaning of reorganizing the world order based on the diplomacy of great powers between the US and Japan. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was a peace treaty between the Soviet Union and Germany, which served as an opportunity for the Soviet Union to continue its revolution, disarm the Soviet Army, the Soviet Union's intention to leave the Allies during World War I, and Germany to focus on the West. Changes in the international situation and major treaties in the early 20th century. Occupation of the Ruhr and Treaty of Locarno. Establishment and significance of the Treaty of Non-Payment. Rhineland-Pearl and European situation changes. Spanish Civil War and international impact. In 1923, France occupied the Ruhr region due to Germany's unpaid war reparations. And Germany's Foreign Minister Stresemann proposed the Treaty of Locarno. The Allied powers accepted the request, fearing the Sovietization of Germany, and France expected immediate support from Britain. In 1928, the Treaty of Bougian was signed under the leadership of France, which aimed to engage the United States in Europe, defined the abandonment of war as a means of national policy, and outlawed war for the first time. Germany's Rhineland-Pearl brought about a change in France's defense strategy and marked the collapse of the Versailles system. The Spanish Civil War served as an opportunity to form the main axis of Berlin and arose as a result of opposition to the social reform policy of the People's Front government. Germany and the Soviet Union. Diplomatic relations and imperial ambitions in the early 20th century. Changes in the Treaty of Rapallo and bilateral relations. Toxin Non-Aggression Treaty and Secret Protocol. Geopolitical competition in the Mediterranean and Middle East. The complexity of German imperialism and the annexation of Austria. Violation of the London Declaration prohibited sole reinforcement. There were wars of Allied sanctions against the Soviet Union and interference with the Soviet Union, but the Allied forces withdrew due to the Red Army's counterattack. The Treaty of Rapallo was a peace treaty for the Soviet Union and Germany to escape isolation in the Treaty of Versailles. Germany approved the Soviet Union as a condition of waiver of compensation and restored diplomatic relations between the two countries. The abolition of the Brest-Litovsk Treaty is meaningful. There was a possibility of collusion between militarism and Bolshevism. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Secret Agreement is a confidential annex to the Toxin Non-Aggression Treaty, which included the agreement between Poland and the three Baltic countries to divide and occupy. Germany felt the need to pioneer new routes due to the British control of the Mediterranean expansion. The UK allowed Germany to enter Turkey to check Russia's expansion into the Mediterranean. The Baghdad Railway contained complex, complementary, and conflicting aspects of German imperialism. The Hitler-Schnicks talks are related to the activities of ultra-Nazism and the annexation of Austria. European situation before the outbreak of World War II. Spanish Civil War and the intervention of the Great Powers. Annexation of Austria. Collapse of the Versailles system. Czech annexation and Munich talks. Failure of appeasement policy. Toxin Non-Aggression Treaty. Prepare for war. The civil war led by General Franco was caused by the landlord class and military forces, and was supported by Germany and Italy. The Soviet Union supported the People's Front government, and Britain and France established an international committee for non-interference. Germany annexed Austria, creating an opportunity to completely revise the Versailles system, and through a referendum, it won approval for the annexation. Also, Germany annexed the Czech Republic, with Britain and France being passive towards Eastern Europe. When Britain, the United States, and France responded strongly to Hitler's plan to annex the Czech Republic by force, the Munich Conference was held, and the Munich Agreement was signed to condone Germany's annexation of Sudeten. Germany prepared in advance with the signing of the Toxin Non-Aggression Treaty in 1939. Analysis of major diplomatic relations and causes before the outbreak of World War II. Diplomatic tensions and alliance formation between European powers. Direct causes and backgrounds of the outbreak of World War II. France and the Soviet Union signed a mutual aid treaty, and Germany abolished the Rhineland Demilitarization Clause. The Soviet Union and Czech alliance were special provisions of the Fluoride Treaty. Among the European powers, there were the German-Polish Non-Aggression Treaty, the German-Italian confrontation with Austria as the apex, the formation of the main axis of Rome-Berlin due to the Spanish Civil War, and the anti-Comintern agreement between Germany and Japan. Germany signed the Iohang Non-Aggression Treaty and the Weiau Non-Aggression Treaty, and also signed the Toxin Non-Aggression Treaty. After the Hitler-Schnitz meeting, ultra-Nazism was active and Austria was annexed. Germany, Italy, and Japan formed a trilateral alliance, which led to the U.S. participation in the war. World War II broke out with Germany's invasion of Poland, and was caused by the vulnerability of the collective security system based on idealism, the inherent limitations and lack of leadership of the collective security system, the British appeasement policy against Germany, and the policy of breaking down the status quo of Hitler in Germany. The causes and development of the outbreak of World War II. The beginning and diffusion of war. Effects of the Treaty of Versailles. The main cause of the outbreak of war. Additional elements of war. World War II began with the German invasion of Poland in 1939, leading to the Allied declaration of war, which expanded to Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. The main causes were the failure of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany's expansionist policies, totalitarianism and nationalism, and economic unrest caused by the Great Depression of the 1930s. World War II major front lines and deployment processes. Development of the European Front. Operation Normandy landing major war talks and participation in the Soviet Union. The beginning of the Pacific Front. Development and termination of the Pacific War. During the development of World War II, Germany captured Paris through Operation Mattaveggi. Italy participated in the German side when Germany's victory became more likely, and in 1940, Germany, Japan, and Italy signed a trilateral alliance. The Normandy landings took place in June 1944 and were a decisive opportunity for the Allies to win. Germany dominated the European front in the early stages, but the Soviet invasion reversed the situation. The Pacific Front began with the participation of the United States in the Japanese airstrike on Pearl Harbor, and the war spread around the world. Japan occupied Southeast Asia and the Pacific to secure southern resources, but the situation was reversed after losing the Battle of Midway and the Battle of Guadalcanal. Japan surrendered unconditionally on August 15, 1945, and the United States established Pacific hegemony. Major World War II events and wartime diplomacy. Major war talks and participation in the Soviet Union. Cairo talks, Yalta Conference, Potsdam Conference, Moscow talks, Tehran Conference. Conflict between the Polish government and the Great Powers. Post-war European reconstruction and the beginning of the Cold War. At the Cairo Conference, the issue of Korea and the issue of punishment for Japan were discussed immediately after the surrender of Italy. The Yalta Conference decided to deal with Germany after the war and the Soviet Union's participation in the war against Japan. At the Potsdam meeting, the demands for wealth in the Kuril Islands, the maintenance of the status quo in Outer Mongolia, and the internationalization of the port of Daren were discussed, and the Soviet Union and Britain and the United States were at odds over the establishment of the Polish government. In addition, trusteeship on the Korean peninsula was discussed, an ultimatum to Japan and Korea's independence were confirmed, and the German-Polish border issue, Germany's demilitarization and non-Asiazation were agreed upon. The Moscow meeting established a European Advisory Committee to study and recommend post-war European issues and decided to eliminate Italian fascism, nullify Germany's annexation of Austria, and punish war criminals. At the Tehran talks, the operation against Germany, Stalin's intention to participate in Japan, and aid to Tito, Yugoslavia were agreed upon. After World War II, the U.S. Marshall Plan was an aid plan for European reconstruction, and in response to the Soviet intervention in the Eastern Bloc, the U.S. announced the establishment of a Faust regime in Europe, and the U.S. responded to the Soviet blockade of Berlin with a strong offensive policy.